welcome. I told you we are going to we're going to keep going live on YouTube until we figure it out and it becomes second nature. So I hope that you are having a great day. It's so funny because it's April 1st. And we woke up to snow here where I live in Utah. And so that was kind of funny too. Let's see. I can't tell if we're going live. What's happening? Okay. Let's see. Are we going? I don't know. We're going to start over. Just in case that wasn't live, I'll rewatch this. And I told you, we're going to figure this out. I'm going to get better at it. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I was just mentioning that it's April 1st and we woke up here in Utah to some snow this morning, which is kind of rude. I think Mother Nature obviously has a sense of humor. So it's already melted, so it was not a big deal, but it's still just not what you not what you want to have happen on April 1st. I'm ready to head into spring and warmer weather and all of that stuff. I also am bringing you my messy cutting table and my not finished pegboard and all of the things, because it is kind of crazy. Sorry, I'm having some, I have a warning popping up here. I'm trying to figure out what it means. So give me 1 second. Making sure that we are going okay. We're just going to kind of keep moving forward. Let me just mess 1 second. Thank you so much for your patience with all of this as I try to figure out what I am even doing. Okay. I'm not sure what is happening here. So we're going to keep moving forward. And if someone could pop into the chat maybe, let me know. Hello, Libby. Okay. Can you hear me, and is the video okay, or are things messing up? I'm not sure what's happening. Oh, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for jumping in. We're just going to move forward and pretend things are great. And then I will go back and we're just going to keep working on updating settings and figuring things out, because I'm not sure how to fix all the things. I'm not sure what's happening. Today, and I meant to grab all the things. Where did I put them? Give me 1 second. I will just jump right back, because it would be super helpful if we could see what it is that we're talking about today. So we are going to be making these really fun placemats. So I love how cute these turned out. I figure out which angle my carrot is. They're just so quick and easy. And this is a really fun way to practice foundation paper piecing. So I know that foundation paper piecing can be intimidating. It can be stressful. You're doing the inverse of things and the mirror image, and it feels like it's going to be really tricky. And there are some ways that it can be tricky, but this is a really fun, really beginner-friendly tutorial and pattern to practice some foundation paper piecing without having the stress of a super complicated, project or anything like that. So this carrot placemat pattern is a bonus pattern in my Carrot Trio mini quilt. once this live stream is over, I will put a link in the description where you can go and get that pattern in my Etsy shop. I might actually put a sale on it for a couple of days in celebration of this video. But the placemat is a really great project to use because the more formal pattern has 3 carrots on a pillow, and it is darling and so fun and perfect for spring. But if you just want a little taste of foundation paper piecing without all the extra stress of having to do multiples of it, this is a fun project that lets you have a finished project pretty quickly, and you only have to go through the process one time to create 1 carrot. Now, you could use one as like a candle mat or something like that, just in the center of a table for a really simple display, or then you can start making multiples of them and have a whole table setting with some cute carrots. So the couple of things that I wanted to talk about why foundation paper piecing is so much fun. I mean, let's look really quick at the lines on this top of this carrot. They are so skinny. The points are so good. And that's not because I'm great at piecing or accuracy. It's because of foundation paper piecing. So that is one of my favorite reasons to create foundation paper piecing patterns and to use them, is because you get really accurate seams, really accurate points. It really helps to create some structure, especially when you want to add some really fine detail, like how skinny the leaves are on this carrot top. Another project that I'm working on right now is for my membership, and it is this really cute heart, but it's small. So this is 3.5 inches finished, or 4.5 inches finished, but this little heart is only 3 inches. It's really small. So when you go to do these points, if you are traditionally piecing it, which I have done, these little squares that you're sewing in are 1 inch. And trying to get your points in the center and the bottom to line up and have this perfect little point at the bottom, it's a lot trickier to do it with traditional piecing and much simpler to do it with foundation paper piecing. So there's a lot of fun ways to use foundation paper piecing. And then once you get good at it, oh man, I mean, the possibilities are endless. And there are some fantastic foundation paper piece pattern designers out there. A couple of my favorites are Liza Taylor, Handmade. She's on Instagram, as well as Christy from Quiet Play. She's a fabric designer for Riley Blake Designs, but she also has a foundation paper piecing membership. Actually, both of them do. There are just some incredible things you can make with it. But we're going to start really friendly, really straightforward, and we are going to make this really fun spring pattern. The first thing that you need for foundation paper piecing is your paper pattern. And it feels like, there's specialty papers you can get, there's really fancy things you can do, but I just print it on regular computer paper because I don't do it a ton. And so I don't really want to invest in a lot of fancy supplies. Now, there's definitely ways, if you get really great at it, that you can improve your, get the fancier tools and all of that stuff. But we're just going to print it onto our regular printer paper because that's what I have around. And you will need 1 copy for each version, or, however many you're going to make, that's how many copies you're going to need. So if you are making 4 of them, you're going to need 4 copies of the foundation paper piecing pattern. We're actually going to work through this and rip up the papers and all of that stuff, so you don't reuse these pattern pieces. So you're going to start with your paper, and then you're going to choose your fabrics that you're going to use. Now on this one, again, we're talking these really skinny lines on our carrot top. So we want to make sure that the fabric that we're choosing for the tops of our carrots is either a solid or some kind of really saturated basic. You could do a tone on tone, but really any kind of print, you're going to lose some of the context of your leaf in the skinny stripe here. So make sure that you're choosing fabrics that are really going to build and add on to the look you're going for rather than detract from it. Now, your carrot piece, this is nice and chunky, so you can really do something cute here. So this one has a really fun floral. This other one, which I'd love, is pink plaid. I mean, give me a break. It's so cute with the orange in there. So much fun. So these fabrics are from an old line by Burlap and Blossom, Gracie Larson. And it's a few years old now, so I don't know that you could find it. But, think outside the box with your carrots and have some fun with your fabric selection. And then you want to make sure that the background fabric that you're using is going to have some really good contrast to both your carrot and your leaves, to make sure that you're not, if you choose a big floral maybe for your background here and you think, oh, in a big piece it reads white and it looks fantastic and it has a white background, but there's big leaves on it. If you get a big leaf piece right next to this skinny leaf of your carrot, you might lose some of the shape of that. So really kind of keep that in mind as you're choosing background fabrics. This one is a seasonal basic from Riley Blake Designs. It's an Easter one. And it's got this multicolored little bunny print in it, and it's darling. It's so cute. So I have pulled some of the colors from the bunnies, and that's going to be the colors of my bindings as I put all of these placemats together. All right, so we have our fabrics chosen. We have our paper pattern ready to go. One thing I do want to note is oftentimes on a foundation paper piece pattern, there will be a guide here to make sure that it's printing accurately for size. Because you want to make sure that it's going to fit into your project the way you intended, you want to make sure that it's coming out accurately. So make sure that you do take the trouble to take your ruler and measure that little square, that guide square, to make sure that it really is accurately reflecting the size that it's supposed to be. Sometimes when you go to print at home, your printer has a setting that's like fit to page or something, and it just kind of takes and shrinks it down, or, and so you may need to mess with your printer settings a little bit to make sure that this is coming out as accurately as it can. All right, we have this printed. Now we're going to take some scissors. We're going to cut apart. Now this one has a little guide on here, so you want to cut out at least to this dotted line around each of the pieces. I like to have a little extra buffer around the edges so that when you trim it down, you have nice exact lines and your finished shape is really all that it is meant to be. On this carrot, these are really simple placings of fabrics here. You could do half rectangle triangles to create the bottom of this. The top was just stitch and flip corners. You could totally do this traditionally pieced, but these are really skinny angles up here at the top, at the sides of this carrot here. And so using a, foundation paper piece template lets you really get accurate with those. I am going to suggest, as you begin your foundation paper piecing journey, starching your fabrics ahead of time is going to give you really nice, crisp folds as you press and create your lines and your shapes on your foundation paper piecing. So give your fabrics a good starch, then cut them down to the sizes that the pattern indicates, and then move forward with sewing. It's going to help you get those seams to lay nice and flat, because with these, you're not pressing any seams open or anything like that. You're always pressing over those seams. So you want to make sure that you have super accurate seams to make sure that once you rip those papers out and it's no longer holding it together, it still maintains the shape you think you had. Okay, so now we're going to jump. I'm going to switch cameras here, and we are going to jump over to checking out how we're going to get started with this. Now, it's helpful if you can set up a cutting mat near your sewing machine and also have a pressing station nearby, because you're going to be using all of those. You're making short seams. If you have to get up and move between stations, it's a lot of moving around, which, if you're going for your steps, that might not be the worst thing to happen, right? Okay, we're going to start with our paper here. This is the piece we're going to start with, is our left leaf piece, or our leaf right piece. Now, here's the part that's tricky about foundation paper piecing. This, when you look at it from this side up, it looks like you're doing the left side, but we're actually building a mirror image of it, and you can kind of see the lines shining through there. This is what the fabric is going to look like on the other side. So this is the part I think that gets people the most hung up, is because you're actually creating the mirror image. And so my best advice for that is to not think too hard about it, which seems counterintuitive, but trust the labels, trust the colors if you have it colored in there. If you need to, go ahead and take some crayons or colored pencils or something and mark up your paper so that you know which color corresponds to which pattern piece or fabric piece you're doing, so that you know where you're at and where you're heading. But try to not overthink this process, because most foundation paper patterns that I have done, it all works out. But if I try to overthink it, then I'm the one who messes myself up rather than the pattern itself. So the first thing that we're going to do, we are going to take our first piece of background fabric here, and it is going to go on the opposite side of the pattern. Now I'm kind of holding this up into the light so you can see the shadow behind there, and I want to make sure that I'm covering the entire shape that needs to be covered by that fabric. Okay, so you can see the fabric shadow behind is covering that entire, all the way up to the point and beyond. Now I placed that with the right side up and the wrong side toward the paper. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little pin right here at the bottom where I'm not going to be sewing or measuring or anything. Some people will use a little tiny dab of a washable glue stick there, just to hold the fabric in place for this first part. Once you get your first seam in here, then it's going to hold it all together. But right now there's nothing holding that fabric to the actual paper piece itself. Once I have that fabric kind of attached to my paper somehow, I am going to fold this paper back on the line between piece 1 and piece 2. So I'm going to take this over here and I'm going to use the light shining through. This is where, if you have a light board, can come in really handy. But you absolutely don't have to have one to do this. If you don't want to invest in one, or you don't already have one handy, I would practice with some foundation paper piecing first. And then if you really love it, a light board might be something to invest in. All right, now I have my seam folded right there. This is where fabric 1 and fabric 2 are going to be connected. And then I'm going to take a ruler and my rotary cutter, and I am going to cut a 1/4 inch away from that fold. And this is going to create the seam allowance in that first fabric piece. Okay. Now I'm going to fold my paper back and flip this over. And now I'm going to use this cut line as a guide to place my fabric piece here. Now, a couple of things to think about as you're placing your fabric here is that we are sewing a 1/4 inch away from this edge. So you want to make sure that where you're sewing, you actually have fabric coverage from edge to edge. The other thing you need to pay attention to, and on this leaf fabric, it's not as vital, but once you get to these background pieces, you are going to fold up your fabric. This line is going to create a straight line up. Now, if this was trying to cover this second piece, you can kind of see that background piece is not getting covered all the way to the top. So I want to make sure that I'm placing this so that my fabric is going all the way across where it needs to. So you can see here that I have a lot of fabric coming off this end and not as much when I'm coming off of this end after it's pressed back up. So you may want to consider auditioning where you're placing it. You may want to slide it up a little bit here so that I have a little bit more coverage on the way up. And because I starched this so good, even that finger pressing is leaving a nice crease. Okay, so I'm going to take these 2 pieces. If you would like, you can add a pin here. Just keep your pin away from where you are going to be sewing, because we are going to flip it over once again. And now we're going to sew right on this line between fabric 1 and fabric 2. Back stitch at the beginning and ending of your sewing, but do not extend your sewing beyond the line here, because we're going to cut it. And sometimes, depending on the foundation paper piecing that you're doing, you may need to fold this piece up and away. And if you have your stitches going beyond that line, it's going to interfere with your ability to place additional fabrics. So I'm going to turn on my sewing machine. It's going to make some noise here for a second. I should have turned it on beforehand. Now, the only change that I'm going to make to my sewing machine is first, if you are using, you may want to choose an older needle on your machine because the paper is going to dull your needle. Or just know that once you finish this, then you want to swap out your needle to a sharp needle because the paper is going to be tough on your needle. The second thing that you will want to do is shorten your stitch length, because what that's going to do is perforate your paper a little bit better so that it's easier to tear off. So I usually just drop it down from a 2.5 to a 2. You may want to go just a tiny bit shorter than that. And depending on what your machine is, you know, how your machine measures stitch length, it might be a different number than mine. But we are going to take this over to our machine, and I'm just going to sew this one seam real quick. So I want to make sure that my needle's going to come down right through that line. And then I'm just going to back stitch a couple of stitches here. And then I'm going to cut my threads. Okay, now I'm going to first remove my pins and clip my threads out of the way just because they're going to stay in the way. And then what we're going to do is press our leaf fabric, our fabric number 2, up and away from our fabric number 1. So I'm going to hit that with an iron really quick. I don't recommend doing this on not a pressing mat, but we're going to pretend that I hit that harder with my iron. Okay, so now we have that pressed up. And one thing that I like to do is kind of hold this up to the light. I'm checking this leaf fabric too, and I want to make sure that I have full coverage of my green fabric, which I do. So I don't have any problems with that. Now what we're going to do is move on to leaf piece number 2. Or the second side of this, which is going to be this line between part 2 and part 3. So in order to sew that down, again, I'm going to fold my paper on that line between fabric 2 and fabric 3. Now I'm going to repeat the same process. Use my ruler, cut 1/4 inch away from that folded line. It can be a scant 1/4 inch if you want. And then especially where this is a dark color and then you're putting a white color over top of that, you may really want to cut this a scant 1/4 inch so that you have some extra coverage of the next piece of fabric as it goes over. Okay, so I'm going to fold that back. I'm going to take my next piece and put it right sides together on that cut edge that I have right there. And this is where having it pressed really well so that this lays nice and flat comes in handy. You may want to press it and then use something like a quilter's clapper to let it cool so that that seam stays nice and flat, especially on little tiny pieces and skinny pieces like this, just to help you make sure that you're positioning things the right way. Okay, I'm going to show you here what I was talking about when I was talking about what it will do if you aren't paying attention to how you're positioning this piece. So the temptation is, because in traditional piecing, you would place this right on top of the one before it, line those up, and then you're going to sew and press it up. But I'm going to put a pin in here right at about where that 1/4 inch seam would be. Might be a little generous on that pin. Here, let me fix this because I just want to show you what this looks like. When you go to press that up, you can see that the corner of the piece here that should be background fabric actually isn't covered by that fabric right now, because instead of centering this across the foundation piece, I was lining it up with this previous one. And I'm only telling you that because I do it all the time. I don't pay as much attention as I should to the background, the fabrics as I place them. So especially when you have this angled seam going up, you want to make sure that you're fudging your fabric towards the highest point of that angle in order to make sure that it covers all the way. So I'm going to slide this up. I want to make sure this bottom is still covering that 1/4 inch down at the bottom. And then I'm going to, again, pin this in place and take it to my machine and sew it right on, flip it over, and sew it right on that line. Now I have that already done on this sample here. So I've sewed it, and then I have flipped my fabric up and away and pressed it. And then I'm going to hold this up and show you that you can see the shadow behind here is covering all of that area, even up to this top point. So I have it positioned well. I have everything covered that needs to be covered. I probably could have fudged it up even a little bit higher, but I'm pretty happy with that. So then I'm going to keep repeating the process, bringing this over, folding it at the line between piece 3 and piece 4. I'm going to take my ruler, trim it 1/4 inch away, and then position my next fabric piece. I'm going to keep repeating that until we have sewn the entire leaf piece. So this is what it looks like on the back side. You can see all of my seams sewn, and then I have all of my fabric pieces on the front. And then what I have done is I have trimmed it right on this outside line so that it's ready to go. Now, at this stage, you really want to make sure that you are reading the instructions on your particular foundation paper pieced pattern, and make sure that the seam allowances are included in this pattern piece, or if you need to add the seam allowance to the pattern piece. So in this case, I wrote it, I know, that I included the seam allowances in this piece, so you cut right on the line. But some patterns will tell you to cut 1/4 inch away from that line. Now, they would have adjusted their fabric size pieces and placement to account for that, to make sure that you have all of the seam allowance and everything that you need. But make sure that you read your pattern and check it to make sure that you are cutting it accurately at this stage. I'm hoping that makes sense. So read your patterns. I know sometimes it seems like I know what I'm doing, I'm just going to jump in, but really I know most pattern designers are just trying to give you as many tips and tricks and suggestions and hints to make sure that you get the result that you want. Okay, so now we have cut our pattern piece. We are going to have repeated this for the second side of this, and then done the same pattern process with our carrot. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out on this carrot piece, let me grab this pattern piece here, is the pieces are numbered. If I hold this up, pattern piece number 1, piece number 2, piece number 3. Now, you look at this and you're like, it doesn't really matter what order they go in. You could do this one second and this one third, but I want to show you down here, you have piece 4 and then piece 5. Now, piece 5 overlaps piece 4. So you need to make sure that you are sewing them on in order so that this goes over that one to create the right shape. Now, in this case, it really wouldn't be critical, one way or the other if you had sewn piece 5 first and then did piece 4. But I do want to point out here, when you stop sewing right at this point, at the end of this line, like I said, don't sew beyond it, because once you've sewn piece 4, then you need to be able to fold back this seam from the fabric. I'm going to just crease that so you can see. And if you have sewn beyond this line, you're not going to be able to pull the paper away from the fabric. So you want to make sure that you're stopping your sewing right at the end of that line and not going beyond it, so that you can put that next piece into place correctly. So you can see that here I have stopped my sewing. If I can get this really close, I have stopped that sewing right at that line so that I could fold this piece back, trimmed my carrot piece, and then and was able to get that nice line all the way up instead of having to fight with the stitches down here. Okay, so now I have my carrot bottom done. There is, in this particular pattern, there is a really nice skinny piece of fabric right here up at the top. My suggestion is you sew it to the first leaf piece with the paper still in, and then remove the paper from the seam between the carrot leaves and the stem piece. Then sew the second half on. Again, leave the paper on the second piece. Trim the seam allowance before you sew the second piece on, because they really do lay right on top of each other. So you may want to trim down this seam allowance a little bit just so that they lay nice and flat. This is also a really good place where starch comes in handy to get you a really nice flat look to your carrot top piece. So you're going to assemble your carrot top piece and then sew it to the top of your carrot bottom piece. Now you'll notice that at this point I still have my papers in the bottom of this one. I do remove the papers, especially from this bottom part, before I sew it to the carrot top, because you don't want to have to try to pull papers out of more seams than you have to. So once you have, and again, this is another step that typically you will find written into the pattern itself, suggestions of when you should pull out the papers, when you should leave in the papers, to make sure that everything comes out just right so that you have access to the seams to pull the papers out and everything like that, so that it works out just how you want it to. Now, I do want to show you about pulling out the papers, a couple of tricks. Now, again, we've shortened our seam allowance in order to create a few more perforations. This is a stage where if you do use a specialty paper, a lot of times people will print their foundation paper piecing patterns onto like a newsprint because it's a thinner weight of paper and so it's easier to tear. So those are all considerations or why somebody might choose to use a different kind of paper for this. But like I'm going to show you, it's totally possible to do it with just your regular paper. Now, the biggest thing that you want to pay attention to is you're trying to not put strain on these seams. So you're going to do your best to really be careful about how you're pulling these papers apart, which is also why I recommend backstitching at the beginning and ending of all of your sewing, so that as you go to pull these papers out, you're not popping stitches and loosening and weakening those seams. So I'm going to start in this seam allowance here at the top, and I'm going to put some pressure right there at that seam with my thumb to hold down the second piece, and then I'm trying to pull just straight up so that I am ripping just the paper and not putting tension on the seam. And I'm going to repeat the same thing with this side. You see how I have my finger right in there at that seam so that as I'm pulling up and away, I am only ripping the paper and not putting pressure on that seam as I can. Okay, so then I'm going to do the same thing with this second side. I'm going to, again, put pressure on that, pop it up. Sometimes I will take it and fold it over, use my fingernail to kind of score it a little bit, again, to weaken that seam of the paper, and then pulling it away, not making sure that you're putting the pressure on the seam itself, so that you're pulling and just putting pressure on the paper and not on the seam. So then we have this middle carrot piece here that seems like it's kind of stuck, and what you need to do is just slide your finger underneath that paper, and you're going to slide it out from underneath the seam on both sides, just whatever little bits of paper are left. And again, I'm just going to score this really quick, and then I'm going to tear it. Now, you might find it easier if you're worried about that seam to pull kind of back and away so that, again, you're not putting pressure on those stitches. Okay, so then again, we're going to come here. We're going to kind of lift out the paper from underneath that seam, finger score it, and tear it away. So you'll repeat that for all of the foundation or all of the paper pieces out of the back of this. Once you have all of that paper out, the rest of our placemat is super easy to assemble. We're going to take our one big piece of background fabric and put it on this left side, and then we're going to take our small piece and put it on the right side and sew those two together, and then we're going to quilt it. So I'm going to switch over to this other camera so that you can kind of see this whole thing. So I have my my front here, I have my back fabric, and I've quilted it. I've just used some really quick free motion quilting, done some flowers on there. And then in the pattern, it has the template to create the rounded corners for it. You can use a bowl, you can use a plate, you can use whatever you want to create that rounded corner. You don't have to round the corners if you don't want. It's definitely cute without. And if you leave the corner square, you don't have to worry about bias binding and all of that stuff. So if you want, you can totally leave it square. But if you want to round the corners, you will just take and I have it right there. You can see I'm just tracing the rounded corner, lining up the two sides with the top and the bottom here, tracing that rounded corner, and then using a pair of scissors to trim it down to create that rounding. And then you will want to use, you could use a double fold. I like an extra wide double fold bias tape, or you can make your own bias binding, which is a totally different tutorial, and we're not really going to cover that here. This is where I'm going to admit that I'm not fantastic at bias binding. I do really like the look that it gives, and using a bias cut binding will help to have your binding lay nicer and flatter. So this one is cut on the bias, and you can see how my corners are nice and flat, and it looks so good. This one, I was lazy and I didn't want to cut it on the bias. And so you can see that my corners are kind of, I don't know if I can show this accurately, but they're kind of pulling up a little bit. Now that's going to even out and eventually it will, relax, but it is kind of cupping up a little bit. And that is because I used straight binding instead of bias cut binding to do these rounded corners. So I do recommend cutting your binding on the bias if you are doing the rounded corners. I think you will be much happier with the overall result. It just conforms so much nicer to these corners. You can get away with it, and I think I was in a rush when I was doing this, so that's part of the reason why those corners are cupping just a little bit. If I had done a little bit better job on it. But cutting it on the bias will help. Now I do have a tutorial, a playlist for how I do binding on small projects. It is straight binding, it is not bias binding. but there are tons of other tutorials out there. And if I get brave, I might do one on bias binding, but I'm gonna need a little bit more practice at that because I have to think really hard when I do it. But it's worth it. It is worth the effort in the end. So that is our foundation paper pieced carrots. I just want to grab, this is the carrot trio. This is what they look like with the three of them together. There is one more border that goes on this, and then it gets quilted and can get turned into a pillow, which is so cute. Or as a wall hanging, just if you need a little extra spring to add to your decor, it makes a really fun one. And now that you can see that the foundation paper piecing really isn't that tricky. The biggest tip with this one is just making sure as you're placing it, as you're going up those angles on the leaves, that you have it shifted enough so that you're covering the high points of those angles as you work your way up. And if you're a little hesitant about it, just cut your fabric pieces a little bit even bigger than what the pattern says. You trim it all down through the process. So it's, you can be more generous with it. I tried, especially on this one that I wrote, to not waste a ton of fabric, but still give you plenty of wiggle room to make it easier to go. But if you are brand new at it, maybe add an extra 1/4 of an inch to the dimensions of the paper or the fabric pieces, just to give you even that much more wiggle room so that as you're working your way up, you can have more room to trim and get things adjusted and set into the right places. So thank you so much for joining today. It has been so much fun. I hope this helps you feel brave, because foundation paper piecing is an amazing tool and it is so fun. There are so many incredible designs that you can create with foundation paper piecing. And if you just let yourself relax into it, trust the pattern designer, use colors to help you if you need to make sure you know where you're placing things, you can design and create some amazing projects. And it's just so fun to have nice, crisp, accurate seams and beautiful points. And so it's worth going through and getting used to foundation paper piecing. This is a really great pattern to start with. Again, I will put the link to the pattern in the show notes. And as I had talked about my membership and this fun heart pattern that I'm working on, I don't know where it went. If you would like more information on my membership, we get together once a month. We sew. I have live classes. So if you're enjoying this class, you get a monthly live class with me. Each month we do a different kind of a pattern. We try to go over all different kinds of techniques. This month for April, we're doing foundation paper piecing. Last month we did raw edge applique. We've done bag making, all different kinds of things. And each month we get together and have a sew day on Zoom where we spend 3 hours sewing together, and it is delightful. So if that is something you are interested in, I will put a link in the description again once I get this posted to YouTube, where you can find out more information and how you can join us in our Let's Sew Friends membership. But until I see you next time, I'm hoping to jump on here live once or twice a month, if not more, and adding some other videos in the meantime in between. So I hope to see you around here on YouTube and all over the internet. I'm on Instagram at Marooney Designs. You can also sign up for my email newsletter. I have tons of freebies, lots of tips, and it is a really fun place to be. Thank you so much for joining in today, and happy sewing, my friends. Have a wonderful week.